The Encounter. On a warm summer evening in the small town of Arden Falls, the streets bustled with the fading energy of the day. The sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the quaint buildings, which lined the sidewalks where laughter and chatter echoed among friends gathering for dinner. Yet, beneath this serene facade lay an undercurrent of tension, historical biases, and unspoken judgments that often simmered just below the surface. Sergeant Mark Whitmore, a seasoned officer of the local police department, patrolled the streets as part of his routine. He had served the community for over a decade, his life revolving around the familiar patterns of his job. As he drove through the peaceful neighborhoods, the flickering street lamps illuminated the quiet sidewalks, the monotony of his work a dull backdrop to his thoughts. Meanwhile, Naya Freeman was just wrapping up a long day at the state prosecutor's office. Known for her tenacity and unwavering commitment to justice, Naya had worked tirelessly on high-profile cases, championing the rights of the vulnerable and holding those in power accountable. On this particular evening, she looked forward to meeting a few friends for dinner, a well-deserved chance to unwind after a grueling week in court. As she strolled down the sidewalk, her mind drifted toward the warmth of good company, laughter, and the comforting ambience of a favorite restaurant. But that tranquility was abruptly disrupted when a police cruiser rolled up beside her. "Hey, you there," a stern voice barked. Nia turned, startled by the sharpness in the tone. Sergeant Whitmore stepped out of his patrol car, his eyes narrowing as he approached her, a posture of authority radiating from him. Dressed in her professional attire, she felt her heart race at the unexpected encounter. Although she was no stranger to being approached by law enforcement in her capacity as a prosecutor, something about Whitmore's demeanor set off alarms in her mind. "Yes, officer," she responded, her voice steady despite the unease gnawing at her. "Do you live around here?" he asked, his gaze cold and assessing. The lack of courtesy or professionalism was palpable, replaced by a blatant air of suspicion. "I'm just passing through, officer." "Is there a problem?" Naya asked, trying to maintain her composure. Yet inside, her instincts told her this was far from a routine stop. Whitmore stepped closer, his hand resting on the radio clipped to his shoulder. "I need to see some identification." Nia's eyebrows furrowed. This was not the typical request she would expect, especially in a town she had called home for years. The level of scrutiny she was facing felt unjustified. "Is there a reason you're asking for my ID, officer?" Her tone shifted to one of firmness, her professional training urging her to stay composed, though anxiety began to coil in her stomach. Whitmore's jaw clenched. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. I'm just doing my job." Nia felt the familiar weight of injustice pressing down on her. She had seen this story unfold countless times in courtrooms and on the news. Taking a deep breath, she responded with clarity. "Officer, I'm a state prosecutor. I'm very aware of my rights. Unless you have a valid reason to detain me, I'm not obligated to show you my identification." For a moment, surprise flickered in Whitmore's eyes before it vanished, replaced by a sneer. "Prosecutor, ha. Well, tonight, you're just another person I need to check out. Show me your ID, or we can handle this downtown." Nia's heart pounded in her chest as the tension escalated. Should she comply to avoid further confrontation, or stand her ground, knowing she had done nothing wrong? "Officer, I've done nothing to warrant this level of scrutiny," she said, her voice unwavering. "If you want to take this further, I'll be more than happy to discuss this with your superior, but I will not allow myself to be harassed." Whitmore's expression darkened, clearly not used to being challenged, especially by a woman he believed had no right to oppose him. He muttered into his radio, "Got a non-compliant individual. Could turn into a situation." Nia's stomach churned at the word situation. She knew all too well what that could mean, especially given the current climate between police and civilians. Glancing around, she noticed a small crowd had gathered, a collection of silent witnesses observing the standoff without intervening. "Officer, I don't think you want to go down this road," Naya warned, her voice steadied despite the turmoil inside her. Whitmore stepped closer, his posture aggressive, seemingly intent on making an example of her. You think you're above the law because you're a prosecutor. Think again. In that moment, Nia felt the weight of every racial injustice she had ever encountered crash over her like a tidal wave. She had built her career on standing up for those who couldn't fight back against power, and now she faced a confrontation that challenged her very identity. Just then, another officer arrived, his face lined with age and experience. He walked up to Whitmore, his expression more controlled as he took in the situation. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone measured, eyes flickering between Nia and Whitmore. "She's refusing to show ID," Whitmore snapped, trying to justify his actions. The older officer turned to Nia, his expression softer but still cautious. "Ma'am, is there a reason why you're not cooperating?" "Because I've done nothing wrong," Nia replied, meeting his gaze. "I'm a prosecutor, and I know the law. There's no reason for this treatment." The older officer hesitated, weighing her words carefully. The tension hung thick in the air, but his calm demeanor offered a glimmer of hope. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Sergeant, I think we need to de-escalate this situation." Whitmore's face tightened in frustration, but he held his tongue. "Ma'am, you're free to go," the older officer said quietly, his voice steady, though tinged with a hint of regret. Nia exhaled slowly, her pulse still racing, but she refused to let her fear show. She nodded her gratitude to the older officer before turning on her heel, walking away with her head held high. She had stood her ground, but deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of a much larger battle. As she disappeared into the night, Sergeant Whitmore stood rigid, fists clenched at his sides. His pride had been wounded, and he understood that their paths would cross again. This encounter had ignited something within Nia, a fire that would not be easily extinguished. In the quiet of her apartment, Nia replayed the events of that evening in her mind. The confrontation, the racial bias, and the sheer arrogance of Whitmore left her shaken. Arden Falls had once felt like a safe haven, a place she could call home. But now, the illusion of safety had been shattered. The next morning, as she sipped coffee at her kitchen table, the sun filtering through the windows, Nia felt the anger simmering beneath the surface. It was no longer just about her. It was about everyone who faced this kind of treatment without the privilege of her position. The harsh reality struck her. Sergeant Whitmore hadn't seen her as a prosecutor or even as a person. Just another black woman on the street, an easy target for his frustrations. Nia had a choice to make. She could dismiss the incident as another example of systemic racism or fight back against the injustice she had witnessed. She was not one to back down from a challenge, especially when justice was at stake. After years of defending the rights of others, fate had handed her a case of her own. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from her friend Tara, a local journalist keen on stories about police accountability. "I heard what happened last night. You okay?" the text read. Nia stared at the screen for a moment before typing back. "I'm fine. Just thinking about what to do next." Tara's response was immediate. "If you want to talk, you know I'm here. Also, this might be the story we've been looking for." Nia knew exactly what Tara meant. They had been searching for a way to expose the systemic problems within the Arden Falls police force for months. Although overt racism was rarely discussed openly in their town, there were murmurs, stories of traffic stops that escalated too quickly. Young black men followed and harassed for simply existing in spaces designated for others. The air was thick with the weight of unspoken truths, and Nia felt compelled to bring these issues to light. As the sun streamed through her window, illuminating her resolve, she realized that the battle ahead would not only be for herself, but for everyone who had been silenced. She had to stand up and confront the biases that had long been buried in the heart of Arden Falls, knowing that her voice could ignite a change that echoed far beyond her own experience. And so, with her heart set on justice, Nia began to chart her course, determined to hold those in power accountable and fight for a future where the streets of Arden Falls were safe for everyone, regardless of the color of their skin. The aftermath. The sun rose over Arden Falls, casting warm rays across the town, but the dawning light did little to ease the weight of Nia Freeman's thoughts. She sat at her kitchen table, a once comforting space now transformed into a battleground of ideas and emotions. The vibrant yellow walls felt suffocating, closing in on her as she sipped her coffee, replaying the confrontation with Sergeant Whitmore over and over in her mind. Nia's phone buzzed again, jolting her from her reverie. It was Tara, eager to meet and discuss the events of the previous night. "Let's grab lunch. We need to talk about what happened and how we can use it to shine a light on police accountability," the text read. Nia agreed, feeling a sense of urgency. She dressed quickly, donning a tailored blazer over her blouse, the crisp fabric serving as a reminder of her professional stature. As she stepped out of her apartment, she inhaled deeply, trying to shake off the remnants of anxiety that clung to her like morning fog. The drive to the cafe felt surreal. The streets, bathed in sunlight, showcased the familiar sights of Arden Falls. Children playing in yards, neighbors exchanging pleasantries, and the aroma of freshly baked goods wafting from local bakeries. Yet every smiling face and every familiar scene only amplified the dissonance she felt within. How could people be so blissfully unaware of the tensions simmering just beneath the surface? Upon arriving at the cafe, Tara was already seated at a corner table, her notepad open, ready to jot down ideas. Her vibrant personality radiated optimism, but Nia could see the concern in her eyes. "Hey, you look like you've been through a storm," Tara said, her voice a mix of empathy and determination. "More like a hurricane," Nia replied, forcing a smile as she took a seat across from her friend. "I still can't believe what happened." Tara nodded, her expression shifting to seriousness. "We need to do something about it. This isn't just about you. It's a systemic issue that needs to be addressed. People need to hear your story." Nia felt the weight of Tara's words. But what if it backfires? What if they come after me? Whitmore already made it clear he's not happy with me. Tara leaned in, her tone fierce. "You're a prosecutor, Nia. You're in a position of power. It's time to use that power for change. What happened to you is a symptom of a much larger problem, and it's your chance to expose it." As they discussed the confrontation, Tara took notes, capturing Nia's every word. They brainstormed ways to approach the story, focusing on the themes of racial bias and police accountability. Nia recounted the moment she stood her ground, the anger bubbling within her, and the isolation she felt in that confrontation. Tara listened intently, asking questions, pushing Nia to explore her feelings and motivations more deeply. "I can't help but think of all the people who don't have the same voice," Nia said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "What about those who can't fight back? Who don't have the resources or knowledge to defend themselves against this kind of treatment?" Tara's expression softened. "That's exactly why your story matters. It's not just about you. It's about every single person who's faced this kind of injustice. You can be their voice. You have the ability to create change." Nia took a deep breath, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "You're right. I can't stay silent. I need to stand up for those who feel powerless." After lunch, Nia felt a renewed sense of purpose. She returned home and sat down at her desk, her laptop open in front of her. She began drafting a letter addressed to the Chief of Police, outlining her experience and the need for reform within the department. It felt cathartic, channeling her anger into words that might evoke change. But as she typed, doubt crept in. What if this made things worse? What if it endangered her career? She paused, staring at the blinking cursor, her mind racing. The fear of retaliation loomed large, but the thought of silence felt unbearable. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of the countless individuals she had represented, those who had faced similar prejudices and injustices. They deserved to be heard, and so did she. Determined to push forward, she sent the letter, her hands trembling slightly as she hit send. There was no turning back now. In the following days, Nia's life was a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and preparations. The response from the chief's office came swiftly. They wanted to meet. Her heart raced at the thought of confronting the very system she had been a part of, the very institution that had let her down. The meeting was set for the following week, and as the day approached, Nia poured herself into research. She read up on police accountability, case studies, and the histories of similar incidents that had occurred across the country. She reached out to community leaders, activists, and even former clients who had experienced injustice at the hands of law enforcement. With every conversation, she gathered strength and perspective, reminding herself of the importance of this fight. On the day of the meeting, Nia dressed deliberately, choosing the sharp professional outfit that made her feel empowered. As she drove to the police station, her heart raced with anticipation and fear. Would they listen? Would they acknowledge the biases that had been allowed to fester? Upon arriving at the station, she was greeted by a receptionist who directed her to the conference room. Nia's stomach twisted as she entered, seeing Chief Anderson sitting at the head of the table, flanked by several officers, including Sergeant Whitmore. The atmosphere felt charged, tension crackling in the air. "Thank you for coming, Miss Freeman," Chief Anderson began, his tone professional yet guarded. "We received your letter and wanted to discuss your concerns." Nia took a deep breath, focusing on her purpose. "Thank you for meeting with me, Chief. I'm here today because I believe there is a significant problem within the department regarding racial profiling and bias. My experience with Sergeant Whitmore is just one example of a larger issue that affects our community." Whitmore shifted in his seat, irritation flashing in his eyes. Nia's pulse quickened, but she pressed on. "I was stopped for no valid reason, and I believe this reflects a pattern of behavior that can't continue. I want to work with you to address this and ensure that our police force is held accountable." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Chief Anderson exchanged glances with the officers beside him, his expression unreadable. "I understand your concerns, but we have procedures in place to deal with reports of misconduct. We take these matters seriously." "Do you?" Nia challenged, her voice steady. "Because from where I stand, it seems like a systemic issue that requires immediate attention. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who has been unfairly targeted and subjected to discrimination. You need to recognize that your department's practices must change." Sergeant Whitmore's face flushed, and he opened his mouth to speak, but Chief Anderson raised a hand to silence him. "Let's hear her out," he said, a hint of irritation in his tone. Nia pressed on, recounting the events of that night, detailing the fear, humiliation, and anger that had washed over her. "It's not just my experience. It's the experiences of countless others who have faced similar treatment. This is about accountability and ensuring our community feels safe and respected." As she spoke, she could see a flicker of recognition in Chief Anderson's eyes. He leaned forward, his demeanor shifting slightly. "We are committed to improving our relationship with the community. I'll admit we have work to do, and your experience highlights areas where we need to focus." The conversation continued, and while Whitmore fumed silently beside the chief, Nia felt a surge of hope. They discussed implementing community workshops on bias training, revisiting protocols for stops and searches, and establishing a system for community feedback on police practices. As the meeting drew to a close, Chief Anderson looked directly at Nia. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. We can't change without input from the community. I appreciate your courage." Nia left the police station with a mix of emotions, relief, frustration, and a lingering determination. It was just a meeting, but it felt like the first step in a long journey toward change. She knew this was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, but she was ready to confront them head-on. That evening, Nia sat down with Tara to share the outcome of the meeting. As she recounted the events, she felt the fire inside her grow stronger. "I believe we can make a difference, Tara. We need to keep pushing for change, keep raising our voices. Tara nodded, her enthusiasm infectious. Let's rally the community. We can organize a town hall meeting, invite residents to share their stories, and gather support for the changes you proposed. If we can unite our voices, we can't be ignored. Over the next few weeks, Nia and Tara worked tirelessly, reaching out to community members, local organizations, and activists. They spread the word about the town hall meeting, encouraging people to share their experiences with law enforcement. As the date approached, excitement and anticipation filled the air, a palpable sense of unity that Nia had never felt before. On the night of the town hall meeting, the community center buzzed with energy. People of all ages filled the room, taking seats and mingling, their faces a mosaic of determination. Nia stood at the front, her heart pounding with a mix of nerves and excitement. She glanced at Tara, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Nia began, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. "We've gathered to discuss an issue that affects us all, police accountability and the need for change in our community. It's time for us to stand together and demand that our voices be heard." As she spoke, stories began to pour in from the audience, tales of racial profiling, unjust treatment, and moments where individuals had felt powerless. Each account echoed her own experience with Sergeant Whitmore, reinforcing the reality that systemic issues were embedded in the fabric of Arden Falls. Nia felt the fire within her grow as she listened to each speaker, their voices rising in unison, echoing the call for change. She realized they were not just fighting for justice in her case. They were fighting for every individual who had ever felt marginalized or oppressed. After the meeting, the crowd buzzed with energy. People exchanged contact information, shared their stories, and united in a shared mission. Nia felt a surge of hope as she watched her community come together, their collective strength forging a path toward change. But in the shadows, Sergeant Whitmore's discontent simmered. He had been watching from the back of the room, his expression a mixture of anger and resentment. Nia sensed his presence, and as she looked at him, she understood that their battle was far from over. In the days that followed, Nia received messages of support and solidarity, but she also faced backlash from those who oppose her advocacy. An anonymous note arrived in her mailbox, reading, "Stay in your lane, prosecutor. You're not above the law." Each message stung, but they only fueled her determination. She understood that change would not come easily, and she was prepared to face the challenges ahead. The path to justice was fraught with obstacles, but she would not back down. As the weeks turned into months, the movement for police accountability in Arden Falls grew. Nia continued to engage with community members, holding workshops, organizing rallies, and advocating for reforms. With Tara by her side, they were making waves, shining a light on the injustices that had long been hidden. Nia knew that the journey was far from over, but she had found her voice, and it was powerful. With each step forward, she felt the weight of responsibility transform into strength, knowing that she was not alone in this fight. Together, they were forging a new path, one where justice and equality could finally take root in the heart of Arden Falls. But little did she know, the real challenges were still ahead. The confrontation with Whitmore was just the beginning of a fight that would test her resolve and challenge the very foundation of her beliefs. As she prepared for the battles to come, Nia reminded herself of the countless voices behind her and the change they could achieve together. And as she looked out over the community she loved, Nia knew that she was ready to face whatever came next, driven by a fire that could not be extinguished. The rising tension. As the weeks passed, the movement for police accountability in Arden Falls continued to gather momentum. Nia Freeman's resolve strengthened as she engaged with community members and worked tirelessly to advocate for reforms. Her voice echoed in town hall meetings, and her presence became a beacon of hope for those who felt unheard. Yet, amidst the unity and passion, shadows loomed over the burgeoning movement, particularly in the form of Sergeant Mark Whitmore. Whitmore had become increasingly agitated by the growing attention Nia was bringing to the department. His pride was wounded, and the realization that he had been challenged in front of the community gnawed at him. He had always seen himself as the enforcer of law and order, a protector of the town. But now, Nia's actions threatened to unravel the very fabric of his authority. One afternoon, as Nia sat in her office reviewing community feedback from a recent workshop, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Tara. "We need to talk. It's about Whitmore." The urgency in her friend's text sent a jolt of anxiety through Nia. She quickly replied, suggesting they meet at their favorite cafe, where they could brainstorm strategies to combat any potential backlash. As Nia drove to the cafe, her mind raced with possibilities. What could Whitmore be planning? Had he been retaliating against the movement in subtle ways that she hadn't noticed? The thought unsettled her, but she was determined not to let fear dictate her actions. When she arrived, Tara was already seated, her expression serious. "Nia, I've been hearing things," Tara began, her voice low. "There are rumors that Whitmore has been talking to some officers about how to deal with you and the movement." Nia's heart sank. "What do you mean? Like trying to intimidate people?" Tara nodded, her brow furrowed. "Exactly. There are whispers about increased patrols in neighborhoods, especially where community members have been vocal against the police. People are scared, and it's creating a lot of tension." Nia leaned back in her chair, absorbing the weight of Tara's words. The very community she was trying to empower was being targeted, and the thought of it ignited a fierce anger within her. "We need to address this publicly. We can't let fear silence us." Tara agreed, her eyes gleaming with determination. "We could organize another meeting, focus on unity, and remind everyone that we're standing up for our rights. If Whitmore wants to instill fear, we'll show him that we're not afraid to speak out." As they strategized, they came up with a plan for a rally that would serve as a powerful demonstration of solidarity. They envisioned a day filled with speeches, testimonials, and community activities, an event designed to remind everyone that they had the right to feel safe and respected in their own neighborhoods. In the following days, Nia and Tara worked tirelessly to promote the rally. Flyers were distributed throughout Arden Falls, social media campaigns were launched, and local organizations rallied behind their cause. The excitement grew as the date approached, the community coming together in a way Nia had only dreamed of. Yet, even as the anticipation mounted, Nia could feel the undercurrent of tension rising. She was acutely aware that Sergeant Whitmore would not take her actions lying down. He was a man who thrived on control, and she had disrupted that balance. On the morning of the rally, Nia woke up with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The sun shone brightly, illuminating her small apartment, but her mind was preoccupied with thoughts of how the day would unfold. She dressed deliberately, choosing a vibrant outfit that made her feel empowered. Today was about strength in numbers and unity against oppression. As she arrived at the rally site, her heart raced. The park was already bustling with activity. Families set up tables for food and refreshments. Volunteers organized banners and signs, and people of all ages gathered in small groups, sharing their stories and experiences. Nia felt the palpable energy of the crowd, a sense of purpose radiating from every individual present. Tara approached her, holding a clipboard. "We're ready to go. The speakers are here, and the stage is set." Nia smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "This is it. Let's show them what we're made of." As the rally commenced, the energy of the crowd was electric. Nia stood at the front, watching as community members took the stage to share their stories. Each narrative added layers to the tapestry of injustice, weaving a narrative of resilience and courage. The audience listened intently, their faces reflecting a mix of empathy and determination. Then it was Nia's turn to speak. As she approached the microphone, the crowd erupted in applause, their support washing over her like a wave. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. This was her moment to amplify the voices of those who had been silenced for far too long. "Thank you all for being here today," Nia began, her voice steady and strong. We are gathered not just to share our stories, but to demand accountability and change. We will not be silenced. We deserve to feel safe in our community, regardless of our skin color. Our voices matter. The crowd cheered, their enthusiasm fueling her passion. What happened to me is not an isolated incident. It is part of a systemic issue that has plagued our society for far too long. We must come together to demand change, not just for ourselves, but for every person who has been unfairly targeted. As she spoke, she noticed a group of officers standing at the edge of the park, including Sergeant Whitmore. He had a stony expression, arms crossed, but Nia could sense the tension radiating from him. She refused to let his presence intimidate her. Instead, she spoke directly to the crowd, urging them to remain united and committed to the cause. The rally continued, filled with music, art, and heartfelt speeches. Yet, as the day unfolded, Nia noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Whispers began circulating through the crowd. "Have you seen the officers over there? Do you think they're going to try to shut us down?" Nia felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She had hoped the police would respect the community's right to assemble peacefully, but the tension between the two groups was palpable. As the sun began to set, the mood shifted even further. Nia and Tara were wrapping up the event when Whitmore stepped forward, flanked by several officers. "This rally is over," he announced, his voice loud and authoritative. "You're violating city ordinances." Nia's heart raced. "We have a right to assemble. We're standing up for our community." Whitmore's eyes narrowed, and he gestured to the officers behind him. "You need to disperse immediately, or we'll have to take action." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Nia could feel the fear beginning to creep in. She stepped forward, her voice firm. "We're not here to cause trouble. We're here to raise awareness. We're standing together to demand change, not to disrupt the peace." Whitmore's gaze was unwavering. "I don't want to escalate this, but you're being warned." Tara moved closer to Nia, whispering urgently, "We need to remain calm. Let's not let them provoke us." The tension in the air was thick, and Nia felt a surge of determination. "This is our community, and we're not backing down. We will stand here together, peacefully, until we're heard." As the crowd began to rally behind her, chanting for justice and unity, Nia felt a wave of empowerment wash over her. They were no longer just individuals with their own stories. They had become a collective force, standing firm against the very authority that sought to suppress them. Whitmore's face reddened with frustration. "I won't ask again. You need to disperse now." But Nia was undeterred. "We are not a threat. We are a community fighting for our rights." The atmosphere crackled with energy as community members rallied around Nia, their chants growing louder. Whitmore's resolve began to waver, and he signaled to his officers, who hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Suddenly, the tension was interrupted by the sound of sirens approaching in the distance. The crowd fell silent, eyes darting toward the street. A police vehicle rolled up, lights flashing, and more officers stepped out, clearly responding to Whitmore's call for backup. The air shifted again, fear settling heavily on the crowd. Nia felt her heart race. "This is not what we wanted," she whispered to Tara, anxiety creeping in. "This is supposed to be a peaceful rally." The crowd shifted uneasily, glancing at one another, unsure of what to do next. Nia knew that the situation was precarious, and the potential for violence loomed. She stepped forward, raising her hands to calm the crowd. "Everyone, let's take a step back. We're here for peace, not confrontation. Let's show them that we can stand together without resorting to violence." But the arrival of the additional officers only heightened the tension. Whitmore stepped forward again, flanked by his backup, and addressed the crowd. "I'm giving you one last chance to disperse. If you don't, we will take action." Nia felt a surge of anger and frustration. How could Whitmore twist their peaceful demonstration into something threatening? "This is our right. We're not afraid of you, and we're not going anywhere." Suddenly, a voice from the back of the crowd called out, "We have the right to be here." We have the right to speak up. That was all it took. The crowd erupted into chants of no justice, no peace. The energy was electric, a palpable force of unity and defiance. Naya felt an overwhelming sense of hope as she looked around at the faces of those who had come together to stand against injustice. But in that moment of solidarity, Nia also sensed Whitmore's frustration boiling over. "You're making a mistake," he shouted, his voice laced with anger. "You'll regret this." Nia knew that the stakes had been raised. She could see the fear in some of the faces around her, but she also saw determination. The rally had transformed into a demonstration of resilience, and they would not back down. With a deep breath, she faced Whitmore and the officers. "We're not here to cause trouble. We're here to advocate for change. We're asking for accountability, for respect, for safety." At that moment, Nia realized that the confrontation with Whitmore was not just a personal battle. It symbolized the larger fight against systemic injustice. She felt a deep responsibility to not only represent herself, but also to amplify the voices of those who had been marginalized. Just then, a figure emerged from the crowd. It was an older woman, her face lined with years of experience and wisdom. "This isn't just about you, Sergeant. It's about the trust between our community and those sworn to protect us. We deserve better, and we're not going to let fear silence us." Her words resonated deeply, and the crowd erupted in applause. Naya felt the energy shift, a wave of strength washing over her. They were a collective force, unwilling to be silenced any longer. Whitmore's expression hardened, and he glanced at his officers. "I'm giving you one last warning. If you don't disperse now, we will take action." But the crowd held its ground, voices rising in defiance. "We will not be silenced. We demand justice." Nia felt a surge of determination as she joined the chants, raising her fists in solidarity with the crowd. She understood that this was about more than just one confrontation. It was about justice for every person who had faced discrimination and abuse. Whitmore's eyes darted around, and Nia could see the tension in his shoulders. He realized that the momentum had shifted, and the community was no longer afraid. As the chanting grew louder, the officers hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. The situation hung in the balance, teetering between escalation and de-escalation. Nia knew that they had to stay united and focused. With renewed energy, she called out, "We are not your enemies. We are your community. We want to work with you, not against you." The crowd echoed her sentiments, their voices rising in unity. Whitmore stood at the forefront, caught between his pride and the reality that he could not intimidate the people any longer. The tension reached a breaking point when suddenly, someone at the back of the crowd shouted, "We need to take this to the next level. Let's go to the station and make our demands known." Nia felt her heart race at the idea. "No, we need to stay here, united," she urged. "Let's not give them a reason to escalate things further. Our strength is in our numbers, and we can make our voices heard without turning this into a conflict." Tara stepped beside her, echoing her sentiments. "We're here to show that we will not be intimidated. We have the right to assemble, to advocate for change." As the crowd continued to chant, Naya felt a wave of hope wash over her. They were standing together, facing the oppressive force that had tried to silence them. In that moment, she realized that they were not just fighting for their community. They were fighting for a future where justice would prevail, where individuals would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Slowly, Whitmore's expression shifted from anger to contemplation. He seemed to understand that the tide had turned and that the community would not back down. The officers beside him shifted uneasily, and Nia could sense their uncertainty. Finally, Whitmore took a step back, his voice lowering. "We'll allow you to continue, but let's keep this peaceful. We don't want anyone to get hurt." Nia's heart raced as the crowd erupted in cheers. They had won a small victory, but she knew the battle was far from over. Whitmore's anger would simmer, and the community would continue to face challenges. As the rally concluded, Nia felt an overwhelming sense of pride. The spirit of resilience shone brightly in the faces of those around her. They had faced adversity head-on and emerged stronger, united in their mission for justice. But as the crowd dispersed and she began to walk away, Nia couldn't shake the feeling that Sergeant Whitmore would not take this defeat lightly. The fight was just beginning, and she was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Determined to continue the fight, she looked around at her community, filled with hope and courage. Together, they were ready to face the darkness, to demand change, and to create a future where justice and equality reigned in Arden Falls. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Nia felt the fire within her grow even stronger. She would not rest until every voice was heard, and every injustice faced its reckoning. The road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready to fight for what was right, fueled by the unwavering strength of her community. The reckoning. In the weeks that followed the rally, Arden Falls buzzed with conversations about police accountability and systemic racism. Nia Freeman had become a focal point of the movement, her speeches reverberating throughout the community and beyond. The events of that day had not only empowered the residents, but had also drawn attention from local media, sparking discussions that had long been avoided. Yet, beneath this hopeful facade, the tension continued to rise, particularly from those who felt threatened by the change. One evening, after a long day at the office, Nia returned home to find a package waiting for her at the door. It was small and unmarked, raising her curiosity. She hesitated for a moment, remembering the threats she had received, but ultimately decided to open it. Inside, she found a framed photo, an image of her standing at the podium during the rally, a fierce expression on her face as she rallied the crowd. But the words written on a piece of paper attached to the frame sent chills down her spine. "You're making a mistake. Stop now before it's too late." Nia's heart raced as she stared at the ominous message. It felt like a direct threat, a reminder that her actions were not without consequence. Anger bubbled within her, mixed with fear. She had expected pushback, but this was different. It was a warning, one that spoke to the lengths some individuals would go to maintain their grip on power. Instead of retreating, Nia felt a renewed sense of determination. This was not just about her anymore. It was about standing up for everyone who had faced injustice. She placed the photo on her desk, a constant reminder of the fight ahead. If anything, this only fueled her resolve to push for change. The following day, Nia called a meeting with Tara and several community leaders to discuss the threats and strategize their next steps. They gathered in a small conference room at a local community center, a place filled with vibrant murals and a sense of history. "Things are escalating," Tara began, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We can't ignore the message you received. We need to strengthen our efforts, make sure everyone knows we're united." Nia nodded, glancing around at the familiar faces of her colleagues and friends. "We need to take this seriously. We can't let fear stop us. But we also need to be strategic. If they're watching us, we need to ensure that we're organized and prepared." One of the community leaders, Marcus, spoke up. "What if we create a coalition? Bring together local organizations, activists, and even some of the local businesses. We could hold a series of events focusing on education, awareness, and advocacy. Let's show them that we are a force to be reckoned with." The idea resonated with everyone in the room. They began brainstorming initiatives, workshops, and outreach programs to educate the community about their rights and encourage civic engagement. Nia felt the weight of responsibility lift slightly as she recognized the strength of collective action. They were not alone in this fight. As the coalition took shape, Nia worked on securing partnerships with local organizations and advocates for social justice. They planned town hall meetings, community forums, and educational workshops to engage residents and equip them with the knowledge and resources they needed to advocate for themselves. She reached out to local schools to involve students, encouraging a new generation to understand the importance of justice and activism. Meanwhile, the tension between the community and the police department escalated. Whitmore, nursing his bruised ego, made it a point to increase patrols in neighborhoods where the activists gathered. His presence loomed large, an unmistakable threat, as officers responded to calls with an increased level of scrutiny. The community began to feel the weight of intimidation, creating an atmosphere of fear that was counterproductive to Nia's goals. One evening, as Nia was preparing for a community meeting, she received an unexpected phone call from Chief Anderson. "Ms. Freeman, I'd like to discuss the recent developments in our community. Can we meet?" Surprised but intrigued, Nia agreed to meet with him the next day at a local diner. She arrived early, a mix of apprehension and anticipation swirling within her. When Chief Anderson arrived, he wore a somber expression, one that seemed to carry the weight of the ongoing turmoil. "Thank you for meeting with me, Nia," he said, taking a seat across from her. "I wanted to discuss your recent efforts and the tensions within our community." "I appreciate it, Chief," Nia replied, her tone cautious. "But I'm concerned about how the police have been responding to the activism. Increased patrols in the neighborhoods where we've been gathering are creating an atmosphere of fear. We need to foster trust, not intimidation." Chief Anderson sighed, rubbing his temples as if trying to alleviate a headache. "I understand your concerns. I assure you, we want to maintain peace, but we also need to ensure that the laws are upheld. There are officers who feel their authority is being challenged, and that can lead to tensions on both sides." Nia leaned forward, her voice firm. "But this isn't just about authority. It's about accountability. The community deserves to know that they can express their concerns without fear of retribution. If we want to move forward, there needs to be a commitment from your department to engage in open dialogue with the community." "I agree," Chief Anderson replied, nodding slowly. "What do you propose?" Nia paused, taking a deep breath. "We need a community advisory board, composed of community members, activists, and law enforcement. This board would serve as a platform for dialogue, ensuring that community concerns are addressed and that police practices are transparent." "And what happens if those concerns aren't addressed?" Chief Anderson asked, his brow furrowing. "Then we escalate. We need to show that we're serious about reform," Nia replied, her tone resolute. "This isn't just a negotiation. It's a demand for accountability." Chief Anderson leaned back in his chair, contemplating her words. "I can't make any promises, but I'll bring this proposal to the department. It may take time, but I want to see improvement in our relationship with the community." Nia felt a flicker of hope at his willingness to listen. "Thank you, Chief. That's a step in the right direction. But we can't wait for change to happen. We need to act now." As she left the diner, Nia felt a renewed sense of purpose. There was still a long way to go, but she had made progress in opening the lines of communication. Her next move was to rally the community around the idea of the advisory board and encourage them to voice their concerns to Chief Anderson. In the following weeks, Nia worked tirelessly to spread the word about the proposal, holding community meetings and encouraging residents to share their stories. The coalition they had built began to thrive, each member contributing their unique perspective and experience. But as momentum built within the community, so did the backlash from the police department. Whitmore, furious at the growing coalition, began to rally his officers against Nia and her supporters. He would often hold meetings, framing their activism as a threat to law and order, stirring up resentment and fear among the ranks. One evening, Nia attended a meeting where community members voiced their concerns about recent police interactions. She listened intently as individuals shared their stories, moments of profiling, unwarranted stops, and intimidation tactics that had left them feeling powerless. Each account solidified her resolve to push for change. As the meeting concluded, an older man stood up, his voice shaking with emotion. "I'm tired of living in fear. I want to be able to walk down the street without worrying about being stopped. This isn't just about us. It's about our children and their future." The room erupted in applause, and Nia felt a wave of solidarity wash over her. This was why they were fighting. They were not just advocating for themselves. They were fighting for a future where everyone could feel safe and respected. As Nia prepared for the upcoming town hall meeting to discuss the advisory board, she noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The community was more energized than ever, but she could also sense Whitmore's growing agitation. He would stop by events, hovering like a hawk, watching, waiting for any opportunity to discredit her efforts. On the night of the town hall, Nia felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The room was packed, community members filling every seat as anticipation hung thick in the air. Tara stood by her side, offering silent support as Nia took the podium, her heart racing. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Nia began, her voice ringing out. "Tonight, we stand at a pivotal moment in our community. We have the opportunity to create a platform for accountability, dialogue, and reform. This advisory board is not just a proposal. It's a commitment to ensuring that our voices are heard and our concerns are addressed." As she spoke, she noticed Whitmore sitting at the back, arms crossed and a scowl on his face. It only fueled her determination to press on. "We must stand together, united in our demand for change. We deserve to feel safe in our neighborhoods, and we won't accept anything less." The crowd erupted in cheers, their energy infectious. Nia felt the weight of her responsibility, but it also ignited a fire within her. This was not just about her. It was about the community, the families, and the future generations who would inherit this town. As the discussion continued, residents shared their thoughts and opinions on the advisory board, expressing hope for change. But as the meeting progressed, Whitmore could no longer remain silent. He stood up, his voice booming across the room. "This is a waste of time. You think this board will solve your problems. It's not the police you should be worried about. It's the crime in your neighborhoods." Gasps echoed throughout the room, and Nia felt the tension rise. "That's not the point, Sergeant," she retorted, her voice steady. "We're advocating for accountability and transparency. This board is a step toward rebuilding trust." But Whitmore was relentless. "Trust? You want to talk about trust? Look at the crime rates. You think a few meetings will change anything? The real issue is the lack of respect for law enforcement in this town." The crowd murmured, a mixture of anger and disbelief. Nia stepped forward, her heart racing. "We're not here to disrespect law enforcement. We're here to demand accountability. If you're truly committed to protecting this community, then you should be willing to engage with us, not dismiss our concerns." Whitmore glared at her, and Nia felt the weight of his hostility. But she stood her ground, unwavering in her belief that they were on the right path. The room was charged with energy, the community rallying behind her. Finally, Chief Anderson interjected, his voice firm. "Sergeant, I think it's important for us to listen to the community. Their concerns are valid, and it's our responsibility to address them." The tension in the room shifted as the crowd rallied behind Anderson's words. Whitmore's face turned crimson, and Nia sensed a change in the atmosphere. As the meeting concluded, Nia felt a renewed sense of hope. They had made progress, even in the face of adversity. The advisory board was one step closer to becoming a reality, and the community's voices were being amplified. But as she left the meeting, Nia couldn't shake the feeling that Whitmore's animosity was far from over. He was a man backed into a corner, and she knew he would not go down without a fight. In the days that followed, Nia continued to work tirelessly, advocating for the advisory board and bringing together community leaders and residents. Yet the tension between the police and the community only intensified. Nia could feel Whitmore's presence lurking at every turn, watching, waiting for an opportunity to strike. One night, as Nia walked home after a late meeting, she felt a sense of unease. The streets were quiet, the night air heavy with anticipation. She quickened her pace, her instincts telling her that something was off. As she turned a corner, she spotted a group of officers standing together, their faces illuminated by the streetlights. Nia's heart raced. She could see Whitmore among them, his expression hard and unyielding. As she approached, he looked directly at her, a smirk creeping across his face. "Out late, are we?" he taunted, the condescension evident in his tone. Nia swallowed hard, forcing herself to remain calm. "I'm just heading home, Sergeant." "Is that right? You should be careful. This town has a way of punishing those who don't know their place," he said, his voice low and threatening. Nia felt a surge of anger rise within her. "I know exactly where I stand, and I won't be intimidated by you or anyone else." Whitmore stepped closer, the tension palpable. "You think you're invincible because you have a title. Just remember, titles don't protect you in the real world." Nia's pulse quickened, but she refused to back down. "I'm not afraid of you, Sergeant. You're not the one who gets to decide who has power in this town." He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that sent a chill down her spine. "You may think you're fighting for change, but the only thing you're doing is putting yourself in danger. Be careful what you wish for." As she walked past him, she felt his gaze burning into her back, and her heart raced. The exchange had left her rattled, but she was more determined than ever to see her mission through. This was bigger than her. It was about justice for all those who had been marginalized, silenced, and oppressed. As she reached her apartment, she locked the door behind her, leaning against it for a moment to catch her breath. The confrontation with Whitmore had rattled her, but it had also fueled her resolve. She was not just fighting for herself, she was fighting for her community. Over the next few days, Nia channeled her anger into action, rallying the coalition around the advisory board proposal. They organized community meetings, engaged residents, and connected with local organizations to build a comprehensive plan for reform. Nia felt the energy of the community surging, a powerful force ready to demand change. But as the movement gained traction, so did the backlash. Whitmore and his allies began to push back harder, using intimidation tactics to instill fear in the community. Officers would stop individuals at random, making vague threats about consequences for speaking out against the department. The atmosphere became charged with anxiety, but Nia refused to let fear silence them. One evening, during a community forum, Nia stood in front of a crowd, her heart pounding. "We cannot allow fear to dictate our actions. We have the right to speak out against injustice, and we will not be silenced." The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of solidarity washing over her. They were ready to fight, ready to demand accountability. But as the night wore on, Nia couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Whitmore's looming presence hung over the meeting like a dark cloud, a reminder of the challenges they faced. As she wrapped up the forum, she spotted a familiar face among the audience. Marcus. He approached her, concern etched on his features. "Nia, we need to be cautious. I've heard that there are plans to retaliate against those speaking out. We can't let them intimidate us, but we also need to be smart." Nia nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "You're right. We need to prepare for what's coming. We can't let them divide us." As they brainstormed strategies for increasing safety and support within the community, Nia felt a sense of unity building. Together, they could withstand the pressure, and she was determined to fight for the advisory board, no matter the cost. In the coming weeks, Nia and the coalition intensified their efforts. They worked on drafting a formal proposal for the advisory board, outlining its purpose, goals, and structure. They reached out to community members, encouraging them to participate in the process and share their insights. But Whitmore was not idle. He intensified his campaign against Nia and her supporters, using every opportunity to undermine their efforts. He leaked information about their meetings to local news outlets, framing them as radical and dangerous, attempting to sway public opinion against the coalition. Nia felt the pressure mounting as the media began to focus on the conflict between the police department and the community. She had anticipated challenges, but the extent of Whitmore's influence was staggering. The community was divided, and some residents expressed concern about the potential consequences of standing up against the police. One evening, as Nia prepared for a critical meeting with local leaders to discuss their proposal, her phone buzzed with a text from Tara. "We need to talk. I have some news." Feeling a mix of curiosity and concern, Nia met Tara at their usual cafe. Tara looked serious as she slid into the booth, I've been talking to some people, and there are whispers that Whitmore is planning to discredit you publicly, possibly even launch an investigation into your conduct as a prosecutor. Nia's heart sank. What? How could he do that? Tara leaned in closer. He's trying to frame you as someone who's not fit for your position. He's trying to undermine your credibility and paint you as a radical. Nia felt a mixture of anger and fear swirl within her. This is ridiculous. I'm fighting for justice. How can he twist that into something wrong? Tara placed a reassuring hand on Nia's. We need to be prepared for anything. If he tries to come after you, we need to counteract it with our own narrative. Let's get ahead of the story. We can't let him control the narrative. Nia took a deep breath, realizing the gravity of the situation. You're right. We need to mobilize our supporters and ensure that our message is clear. We can't let him intimidate us. In the following days, Nia worked with Tara and the coalition to counteract Whitmore's tactics. They organized press conferences, held community forums, and engaged local media to ensure that their message was clear, that they were advocating for accountability and reform, not rebellion. As the pressure mounted, Nia prepared herself for whatever challenges lay ahead. She understood that the fight for justice was never easy, but she was resolute in her belief that change was possible. The people of Arden Falls were beginning to see the truth, and she would not let Whitmore's intimidation tactics silence their voices. But just as the coalition began to gain traction, the unthinkable happened. One evening, as Nia was leaving her office late, she was confronted by an unexpected figure, Sergeant Whitmore. His demeanor was different this time, colder and more menacing. "Freeman," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're making a grave mistake. You're stirring up trouble you can't handle. You think you're untouchable, but you're not." Nia felt a chill run down her spine. "I'm fighting for what's right, Whitmore. I won't back down." He stepped closer, invading her personal space. "You think you're a hero. You're just a target. I suggest you reconsider your actions before it's too late." Nia held his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm not afraid of you or your threats. I will continue to fight for justice, no matter the cost." As she walked away, Nia felt a mix of fear and determination. Whitmore's warning echoed in her mind, but she knew she could not allow fear to dictate her actions. This was about more than her. It was about the community, the fight for justice, and the future they all envisioned. That night, as she lay in bed, she replayed the confrontation in her mind. Nia felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, but she was determined to rise to the occasion. The stakes were high, but she was ready to face whatever challenges came her way. The following day, the coalition held a meeting to discuss the next steps. Nia presented the idea of a public awareness campaign, emphasizing the importance of community engagement. They discussed organizing rallies, educational workshops, and community forums to ensure that their voices were heard. As they brainstormed ideas, Nia felt a surge of hope. They were not just fighting for themselves. They were building a movement that could change the landscape of Arden Falls for generations to come. But deep down, she knew that Whitmore was watching, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. And as the tension escalated, Nia prepared herself for the battle ahead, fueled by the strength of her community and the unwavering belief that justice would prevail. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but Nia was ready to confront whatever came next. The fight for justice was far from over, and she was determined to see it through to the end. The turning tide. As the momentum for the movement surged through Arden Falls, Nia Freeman found herself at the center of a complex web of challenges and hopes. The community was mobilizing, their voices rising in unison against the backdrop of increasing tensions with the police department. But with every step forward, the shadows of intimidation loomed larger, particularly from Sergeant Mark Whitmore, who was determined to quash any dissent. Nia had spent countless hours strategizing with Tara and the coalition, planning the next big rally aimed at raising awareness and gathering further support for the advisory board. The momentum was palpable, and she felt a surge of optimism every time she saw community members rally together, sharing stories and experiences. However, the looming threat of Whitmore's retaliation hung heavily over her like a dark cloud. One bright Saturday morning, the coalition gathered in a local park to set up for the rally. Banners were being hung, tables were filled with pamphlets, and volunteers buzzed with excitement. Naya felt a sense of purpose wash over her as she moved through the crowd, chatting with supporters and ensuring everything was in place. Just as she was about to take a moment to breathe, Tara approached her, a serious expression on her face. "Nia, we need to talk. I've heard some disturbing news." "What is it?" Nia asked, her heart racing. "I overheard some officers discussing plans to disrupt our rally. They're planning to make it look like we're causing trouble, that we're a threat to public safety," Tara replied, her tone urgent. Nia's stomach twisted at the thought. "They can't just come in and undermine everything we're trying to do. We need to prepare for this." Tara nodded, her eyes blazing with determination. "We should have a plan in place. If they try to disrupt us, we need to stay calm and stick to our message. We have the right to gather peacefully." As the crowd began to swell, the atmosphere filled with energy and anticipation. Nia knew that the stakes were high, and the rally would be a test of their resolve. The community had come together, and she was determined to ensure their voices were heard. As the rally commenced, Nia took to the stage, her heart pounding with excitement and anxiety. "Thank you all for being here today. We stand together, united in our demand for justice and accountability." The crowd erupted in cheers, their enthusiasm electrifying. The speeches began, with various community members sharing their experiences of injustice and discrimination. Nia listened intently, feeling the weight of each story. This was why they were fighting, to ensure that these voices were not just heard but respected. But as the rally continued, Nia couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She scanned the park, her eyes landing on a small group of officers stationed at the edge of the event, including Whitmore. His expression was inscrutable, but she could sense the tension radiating from him. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. A commotion erupted near the back of the crowd, and Nia's heart sank as she saw officers moving in, attempting to break up the gathering. The crowd grew restless, whispers of fear rippling through the audience. "Stay calm," Nia shouted, raising her hands to quell the rising panic. "We're here peacefully, and we have every right to be." Whitmore stepped forward, his demeanor confrontational. "This rally is not sanctioned. You need to disperse now, or we will take action." Nia felt a surge of anger as she faced him. "We're not going anywhere. This is our community, and we have the right to express our concerns." The crowd rallied behind her, voices rising in a unified chant for justice. Whitmore's expression hardened, and he gestured to the officers around him. "You're all making a mistake. If you don't leave now, there will be consequences." Nia felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but she knew she couldn't back down. "We will not be intimidated. We're fighting for our rights, and we will be heard." As the standoff escalated, Nia glanced around, noticing a local news crew setting up nearby. An idea sparked in her mind. "Let's show them that we're peaceful," she called to the crowd. "If they want to portray us as a threat, let's show them our strength and unity." The crowd responded with shouts of agreement, their chants growing louder. "We want justice. We want peace." Nia stepped back from the edge of confrontation and addressed the media. "We are gathered here today to advocate for change, to demand accountability from our police department. We are not a threat. We are a community standing up for what is right." The media captured her words, and Nia felt a renewed sense of hope as she saw the crowd rallying around her. Whitmore's frustration was evident, and for a moment, she saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. But he quickly regained his composure. "You're making a big mistake, Freeman. This will not end well for you or your movement." Nia refused to back down. "I'm not afraid of you or your threats. We're here to demand change, and nothing you do will silence us." With the media present, Whitmore realized that escalating the situation further could backfire. He exchanged glances with his officers, and for a moment, it seemed as though they were considering their next move carefully. After what felt like an eternity, Whitmore stepped back, gesturing to his officers to do the same. "Fine, but don't think this is over," he warned, his voice dripping with disdain. Nia exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding as the crowd erupted in cheers. They had held their ground, and for now, they had won this battle. The media coverage would amplify their message, and Nia felt a sense of accomplishment swell within her. But she also knew that Whitmore would not remain passive for long. This confrontation was only a prelude to the deeper challenges that lay ahead. As the rally wrapped up, Nia stood amidst the crowd, a mixture of relief and determination coursing through her veins. She had witnessed the power of unity, the strength that came from standing together against injustice, but she also understood that the fight was far from over. In the days that followed, Nia and the coalition focused on maintaining the momentum generated by the rally. They held meetings to strategize their next steps and solidified their plans for the advisory board. The community was energized, and support continued to pour in from various organizations and activists throughout the region. However, Whitmore and his allies were not idle. The media coverage of the rally had put them on the defensive, and they began to implement strategies to discredit Nia and the movement. They leaked misinformation to local news outlets, attempting to portray Nia as a radical intent on causing chaos within the community. Nia received a call from Tara one afternoon, her tone grave. "Nia, I just saw a report on the news. They're framing you as a troublemaker. You need to be careful. This could escalate quickly." Nia felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. "I knew this would happen. We need to counteract this narrative before it gains traction." They convened an emergency meeting with the coalition, discussing strategies to combat the misinformation. Nia suggested hosting a press conference to address the false claims head-on, emphasizing their commitment to community engagement and reform. As the press conference approached, Nia felt a mix of dread and determination. This was a critical moment, and she knew they had to present a united front. On the day of the conference, she arrived early, preparing her notes and gathering her thoughts. The room was filled with reporters, cameras flashing, eager to capture the moment. Nia took a deep breath, stepping up to the podium as the murmurs quieted. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady. "I'm here to address the recent misinformation being spread about our movement. We are not radicals. We are concerned citizens advocating for accountability and justice within our community." As she spoke, she saw a few familiar faces among the reporters, their expressions attentive. "Our goal is to create an advisory board that will facilitate open dialogue between law enforcement and community members. We want to build trust, not fear." The questions from reporters began to flow, some challenging, others supportive. Nia navigated each inquiry with poise, emphasizing their commitment to peace and collaboration. The more she spoke, the more she felt the weight of the community behind her, propelling her forward. But then, a voice from the back of the room cut through the atmosphere. "What do you say to the claims that your movement is inciting violence?" Nia's heart raced, but she held her ground. "We are not inciting violence. We are advocating for change in a peaceful manner. Our focus is on justice, not chaos. It's important to distinguish between those who seek accountability and those who wish to maintain the status quo through fear." The room fell silent, and she could feel the intensity of the moment. "We are standing up for every person who has faced injustice in our community. This is about our children, our families, and our future. We will not be silenced by threats or misinformation." As the press conference concluded, Nia felt a surge of hope. The tide was beginning to turn, and she could sense the community rallying behind her. But she also knew that Whitmore would not take this defeat lightly. In the following days, the coalition worked diligently to amplify their message, utilizing social media, organizing community events, and fostering relationships with local organizations. The atmosphere was charged with excitement and determination, a collective force ready to confront the challenges ahead. But Whitmore was not backing down. He continued to spread misinformation, rallying his allies within the police department to undermine Nia's credibility. Rumors circulated, attempting to paint her as a threat to public safety, as officers began to patrol neighborhoods with increased scrutiny. One evening, as Nia returned home after a long day, she noticed a police cruiser parked across the street. Anxiety gripped her as she recognized the unmistakable presence of Whitmore's officers. She quickened her pace, feeling a sense of vulnerability settle in. Inside her apartment, Nia locked the door and leaned against it, her heart racing. The pressure was mounting, and she could feel the walls closing in. But instead of succumbing to fear, she chose to focus on the community that had rallied around her. The following day, the coalition held a community forum to discuss their next steps. Nia felt a sense of empowerment as she listened to the voices of her neighbors, their experiences echoing her own. Together, they brainstormed strategies to combat the intimidation tactics being employed by the police. As the forum progressed, Nia's resolve strengthened. They were not just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for the heart and soul of their community. She knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she was determined to push forward, fueled by the hope of a brighter future. But as the weeks wore on, the pressure continued to escalate. Whitmore intensified his campaign against Nia, using every opportunity to undermine her credibility. He rallied his supporters, spreading rumors that turned neighbors against one another, creating a divide that threatened to tear the community apart. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Nia received a call from Tara. "Nia, we need to meet. Things are getting out of hand. I've heard that Whitmore is planning something big, something that could disrupt our efforts." Nia's heart sank. "What do you mean?" "I don't have all the details, but there are whispers that he's trying to orchestrate a confrontation at our next event. We need to be prepared," Tara replied, urgency lacing her voice. Determined not to be caught off guard, Nia gathered the coalition for an emergency meeting. They strategized ways to ensure their safety and discussed how to remain peaceful in the face of provocation. As they planned, Nia felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were not alone in this fight. They had each other, and they were determined to stand strong against the tide of intimidation. But as the day of the event approached, Nia couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The tension in Arden Falls was palpable, and she knew that Whitmore would stop at nothing to protect his authority. On the day of the event, the community gathered in the park, excitement buzzing in the air. Nia stood at the forefront, her heart racing as she surveyed the crowd. This was their moment to showcase their unity and strength, to demand accountability and reform. But as the event unfolded, Nia spotted a group of officers standing at the edge of the gathering, including Whitmore. The tension in the air thickened as she felt his gaze upon her, a silent threat lurking just beneath the surface. She stepped forward, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. "We are here today to stand together, to advocate for justice and accountability. We will not be silenced, and we will not back down." As the crowd erupted in cheers, Nia felt a surge of determination. They were united, standing firm against the challenges ahead. But just as the atmosphere shifted, a commotion erupted near the back of the gathering. Nia's heart raced as she saw officers moving in, attempting to break up the peaceful event. Panic rippled through the crowd, and Nia felt the weight of their fear. "Stay calm," she shouted, her voice rising above the chaos. "We're here peacefully, and we have every right to assemble." But as Whitmore stepped forward, his demeanor confrontational, Nia knew that they were at a turning point. "This gathering is not sanctioned," he declared, his voice booming. "You need to disperse now." Nia's heart pounded in her chest as she faced him. "We will not be intimidated. We have the right to stand up for our community." As the tension reached its peak, Nia felt a surge of determination. This was a battle for their voices, their rights, and their future. The community rallied behind her, their chants of "no justice, no peace." echoing through the park. But just as it seemed that they might break through, Whitmore's officers moved in, escalating the situation. Naya stood her ground, her heart racing as she faced the confrontation head-on. "We will not back down," she shouted, the strength of her words resonating with the crowd. "This is our community, and we will be heard." As the officers moved closer, Nia knew that the fight for justice had reached a critical juncture. They had come too far to let fear silence them, and she was determined to see this through to the end. With each moment, she felt the power of unity surging around her, a collective force ready to stand against oppression. As the crowd rallied behind her, she knew that this was not just a confrontation. It was a pivotal moment in the fight for justice in Arden Falls. And as she stood there, facing the very embodiment of the challenges they sought to dismantle, Nia felt a deep resolve blossom within her. They would fight for their rights, for their community, and for a future where justice prevailed. No matter the cost, they would not be silenced. The path to change. The tension in the park was palpable as the standoff between Nia Freeman and Sergeant Mark Whitmore escalated. Nia stood at the forefront of the crowd, her heart racing, but her resolve unwavering. This was a critical moment, not just for her, but for the entire community of Arden Falls. The stakes were high, and she knew that the outcome of this confrontation could either solidify their efforts for change or push them back into the shadows of silence and fear. "Everyone, stay calm," Nia shouted over the rising noise of the crowd. "We are here for a peaceful gathering. We have every right to be here and express our concerns." The crowd rallied behind her, their voices rising in a chorus of support. No justice, no peace. They chanted, their determination palpable. Nia could feel the strength of their unity, a force that empowered her even as the officers, including Whitmore, closed in. Whitmore's expression was fierce, his jaw clenched as he took a step forward. "I won't warn you again. This is an unlawful gathering, and if you don't disperse immediately, you will be arrested." His voice was commanding, but the fury emanating from the crowd was equally powerful. In that moment, Nia felt a swell of courage wash over her. "You can't intimidate us, Sergeant," she called out, her voice firm and unwavering. "We're standing up for our rights, for justice, and for every person who has faced injustice in this community." The crowd erupted in cheers, their chants growing louder, drowning out Whitmore's threats. It was a moment of collective power, a realization that they were not alone in this fight. The energy shifted. They were no longer passive observers. They were active participants in the pursuit of justice. As the officers hesitated, unsure of how to respond to the sheer force of the community's resolve, Nia seized the opportunity. "Let's show them what we're made of. We will not be silenced, and we will not back down." She raised her fist, and the crowd mirrored her gesture, an emblem of their unity and strength. But just as Nia felt they were gaining ground, she saw movement at the edge of the park. A larger contingent of police officers arrived, sirens blaring and lights flashing. The sound sliced through the air, an ominous reminder of the forces they were up against. "Stay together," Nia urged the crowd. "We're here peacefully. We have every right to assemble." Whitmore turned to his officers, barking orders. "Form a line. Don't let them get out of control." The tension in the air thickened, and Nia felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She glanced around, noticing the fear in some faces, people who had come out to support, but were now confronted with the very real threat of police action. Nia knew that she needed to be the voice of calm and courage in that moment. "We are not here to cause trouble," she said, her voice steady. "We're here to demand accountability. We will remain peaceful, but we will not be intimidated." The crowd began to chant again, their voices rising in unison. "Justice, justice, justice." The sound echoed through the park, a powerful reminder of their shared purpose. Nia felt a surge of pride as she looked at her neighbors, their faces a mix of determination and defiance. With the police closing in, Nia realized they needed a strategy. "Let's move towards the center of the park," she shouted. "Stay together, and we'll make our voices heard. As they shifted, Naya led the crowd away from the encroaching officers, creating a buffer that kept their unity intact. The movement felt like a wave, a collective force pushing back against the tide of intimidation. The media, who had gathered to cover the rally, began to film the unfolding events. Naya felt a flicker of hope. They could use this exposure to amplify their message. "Let's make sure our voices are heard," she encouraged the crowd. "This is our moment to shine a light on the issues we face." But as they moved to the center of the park, Whitmore's frustration boiled over. "This is your last chance to disperse. You're obstructing justice," he yelled, his voice laced with anger. Nia stepped forward, undeterred. "We are not obstructing justice. We are demanding it. This is about accountability. This is about ensuring that every person in Arden Falls can live without fear." The officers were visibly tense, some glancing at each other as if questioning their orders. Nia could sense the shift in the atmosphere. There was a crack in the facade of authority, and the crowd was pressing forward with an undeniable energy. "Let's hold the line," Nia urged. "Together, we are stronger than any intimidation tactics." Just then, a young man from the crowd shouted, "We have rights. We have the right to be heard." "Exactly," Nia replied, her heart swelling with pride. "We are standing up for our rights, for our families, for our community. We will not allow fear to silence us." The officers hesitated, caught between their orders and the palpable energy of the crowd. Nia knew that this was a pivotal moment. If they could hold their ground long enough, they might just tip the scales in their favor. The crowd began chanting once more, their voices melding into a powerful anthem of defiance. "No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace." The energy was infectious, and Naya felt the strength of their unity surge through her. As the chants echoed across the park, Nia spotted Tara moving through the crowd, her camera capturing the moment. "We need this for the records," she shouted, her voice filled with determination. "Let the world see what's happening here." Nia's heart raced with anticipation. They were not just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for every person who had faced discrimination and injustice in their lives. This was a moment that could change the narrative and show the world the strength of their resolve. With the crowd still chanting, Whitmore stepped forward again, but this time with less confidence. "You're making a mistake, Freeman," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. "You're putting everyone at risk." Nia took a step closer, her eyes locked on his. "No, Sergeant, you're the one who's putting lives at risk by choosing intimidation over dialogue. We are demanding change, and we will be heard." As the confrontation continued, Naya felt the atmosphere shift. The officers' resolve began to waver, and the media captured every moment. The tide was turning, and she could sense it. After several tense moments, Whitmore took a step back, visibly frustrated. "You're all making a big mistake," he muttered, signaling to his officers to fall back. "This isn't over." The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices filled with triumph. They had held their ground, and for now, they had won this battle. But Nia knew that Whitmore's threats were not idle, and they would need to stay vigilant in the days to come. As the rally wrapped up, Naya felt a sense of accomplishment wash over her. They had stood firm against intimidation and made their voices heard. But as she looked out over the crowd, she also felt the weight of the ongoing struggle. This was just one battle in a much larger war for justice. In the days following the rally, Nia and the coalition focused on solidifying their plans for the advisory board. They reached out to local leaders, community organizations, and even sympathetic members of the police force who believed in accountability and reform. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and they began to draft a formal proposal that outlined their goals and objectives. But Whitmore was not one to be easily defeated. He intensified his campaign against Nia and her supporters, seeking to undermine their credibility and rally opposition within the community. Rumors began to spread, painting Nia as a radical intent on causing chaos in Arden Falls. One evening, As Nia sat down to review the proposal for the advisory board, her phone buzzed with a text from Tara. "We need to meet. Whitmore is planning something big, possibly a counter-protest at our next event." Nia's stomach dropped. "We can't let him intimidate us," she replied, determination coursing through her veins. "We need to mobilize our supporters and ensure that we're prepared." They met the next day, gathering at the community center to discuss their strategy. The mood was tense but resolute as they brainstormed ways to counteract Whitmore's tactics. "We need to spread the word," Tara said, her voice firm. "We can't let them dictate the narrative. We need to show that our movement is about justice and accountability, not chaos." Nia nodded, feeling the energy in the room. "Let's organize a community meeting to discuss our next steps. We need to keep the lines of communication open and reassure everyone that we're standing together." As they planned, Nia felt a sense of empowerment. They were not alone in this fight. They had each other, and they were committed to pushing for change. But as the meeting drew to a close, Nia couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Whitmore was watching, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. The day of the community meeting arrived, and Nia felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. The room was filled with residents eager to discuss the advisory board proposal and voice their concerns. As she took the podium, she could feel the weight of their hopes resting on her shoulders. "Thank you all for coming," Nia began, her voice steady. "Today, we are here to discuss the advisory board and our ongoing fight for accountability and justice within our community." As she spoke, the crowd listened intently, their faces reflecting a mix of determination and hope. Nia outlined the goals of the advisory board, emphasizing the importance of open dialogue between law enforcement and the community. But as the discussion progressed, Nia felt a familiar presence in the back of the room. Whitmore, flanked by a few officers. His expression was cold and calculating, and Nia knew that he would not let this meeting go unchecked. After a particularly poignant story from a community member about their negative interactions with the police, Whitmore stood up, his voice booming. "This is nothing but a waste of time. You're only creating more division in our community." The room fell silent, tension hanging thick in the air. Nia took a deep breath, reminding herself of the importance of remaining calm. "We are not creating division. We are advocating for accountability. We want to ensure that everyone in Arden Falls feels safe and respected, regardless of their background." Whitmore sneered. "You think this advisory board will solve anything? You're only making things worse. You don't know what it's like to maintain order in this town." Nia stepped forward, her heart racing, but her voice steady. "I know what it's like to fight for justice, to stand up for those who have been silenced. This is about more than maintaining order. It's about creating a community where everyone can feel safe and valued." The crowd erupted in applause, their support bolstering Nia's confidence. But Whitmore was unyielding, his eyes narrowing as he attempted to regain control of the narrative. "You're putting everyone at risk," he shot back, his tone harsh. "You need to think about the consequences of your actions." Nia felt the weight of his threats, but she refused to let fear dictate her response. "No, Sergeant. We're putting the safety of our community first. You can't intimidate us into silence. We are demanding change, and we will be heard." The tension in the room was electric, and Nia could feel the eyes of the community upon her. She knew that this confrontation was about more than just her. It was about every person who had faced injustice. As the meeting continued, community members began to voice their support for the advisory board, sharing their own stories and concerns. Nia felt the strength of their unity enveloping her, a powerful reminder of why they were fighting. But as the meeting wrapped up, Whitmore's presence lingered in the air like a storm cloud. Nia knew that he would not remain passive for long, and the path ahead would be filled with challenges. In the days that followed, Nia and the coalition continued to push for the advisory board, working tirelessly to rally support and engage community members. They organized workshops, educational events, and outreach initiatives, determined to keep the momentum alive. But as the pressure mounted, Whitmore's tactics grew increasingly aggressive. He began to target individuals within the coalition, attempting to sow discord and fear among their ranks. The community began to feel the effects of his intimidation, with some residents expressing concerns about speaking out against the police. One afternoon, as Nia was reviewing materials for an upcoming community event, she received a text from Tara. "We need to meet urgently. There's been a threat against you." Her heart raced as she read the message. "What kind of threat?" she replied, her anxiety spiking. Tara's response was swift. "I'll explain when I see you. Just meet me at the community center." When Nia arrived, she found Tara pacing anxiously. "What's going on?" Nia asked, her heart pounding. "I heard from a reliable source that Whitmore is planning to make an example out of you," Tara said, her voice low. "He's been talking to other officers about how to discredit you, possibly even arrest you at the next event to intimidate others." Nia's breath caught in her throat. "This is insane. I'm fighting for justice, not breaking any laws." "I know," Tara replied, her expression grave, "but he sees you as a threat to his authority. We need to be prepared for anything." Nia felt a mix of fear and anger surge within her. "We can't let him intimidate us. We need to take this to the next level. If they think they can silence us with threats, they're mistaken." Together, they brainstormed strategies to counter Whitmore's tactics. They decided to reach out to local media, ensuring that any potential incident would be documented and reported. Nia understood that transparency would be their ally in this fight. In the days leading up to the event, Nia and the coalition worked tirelessly to mobilize support and create a strong presence. They wanted to show Whitmore that they would not be cowed by intimidation. On the night of the event, Nia arrived early, her heart racing with anticipation. The community center was filled with supporters, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of lights. As she looked around, she felt a surge of hope. They were ready to stand together against the tide of fear. As the event kicked off, Nia took to the stage, her heart pounding with excitement and resolve. "Thank you all for coming tonight. We are here to stand up for justice, for accountability, and for our community." The crowd erupted in applause, their energy infectious. Nia felt the weight of their support, a reminder of the strength they had built together. But as she continued her speech, she spotted Whitmore in the back, arms crossed, and an expression of disdain etched on his face. "You may think you're invincible, Freeman," he shouted from the back, attempting to disrupt her message. "But you're only making things worse." Nia stood her ground, unwavering. "We're not here to cause chaos. We're here to demand justice. We will not allow intimidation to silence us." The crowd responded with cheers, their solidarity bolstering Nia's confidence. This was their moment to shine a light on the issues they faced and to stand firm in their commitment to change. As the event progressed, Nia felt the atmosphere shift. The community was rallying behind her, sharing their stories and concerns, and Whitmore's presence began to wane. The tide was turning, and she could feel the collective strength of the community behind her. But just as the energy reached its peak, the doors swung open, and a group of officers entered the room. Nia's heart sank as she recognized Whitmore at the forefront, flanked by his colleagues. The tension in the air thickened as they approached the stage. "Everyone needs to calm down," Whitmore barked, his voice cutting through the atmosphere. "This is a public gathering, and if you don't disperse immediately, we will have to take action." Nia felt a surge of fear ripple through the crowd, but she knew she had to remain calm. "We are not causing trouble, Sergeant. We are advocating for justice and accountability." The officers began to move closer, their expressions stern and unyielding. "You're obstructing justice," Whitmore shouted, attempting to regain control of the situation. But the crowd rallied behind Nia, their voices rising in unison. "No justice, no peace," they chanted, their determination palpable. "Stay together," Nia shouted, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We will not be intimidated. We have the right to gather peacefully." As the tension reached its peak, Naya felt a wave of resolve wash over her. They were not alone in this fight. They had each other, and they were determined to stand strong against the tide of intimidation. In that moment, she took a step forward, locking eyes with Whitmore. "You can't silence us. We will fight for our rights, and we will not back down." With the crowd behind her, Naya felt the strength of their unity surge through her. This was not just about her. It was about every person who had faced injustice, and they would stand together to demand change. As the officers hesitated, the atmosphere shifted once more. The power of the community was undeniable, and Naya could sense that they were making a difference. They had held their ground, and for now, they had won this battle. But as the dust settled, Naya knew that the fight was far from over. Whitmore's threats lingered in the air, a reminder of the challenges they faced. She would need to remain vigilant, to continue advocating for justice and accountability in Arden Falls. In the weeks that followed, Naya and the coalition worked tirelessly to solidify their proposal for the advisory board. They gathered support from community leaders, activists, and organizations, determined to push for real change. But Whitmore was relentless. He continued his campaign of intimidation, targeting individuals within the coalition and attempting to undermine their credibility. Naya felt the pressure mounting, but she refused to let fear dictate her actions. As the date for the advisory board proposal approached, Naya felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. This was their chance to advocate for real change, to ensure that the voices of the community would be heard. The day of the presentation arrived, and Naya stood before a panel of city officials, community leaders, and law enforcement representatives. She could feel the weight of their expectations resting on her shoulders. "Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to present our proposal for the advisory board," Naya began, her voice steady. "We are here to advocate for accountability, transparency, and dialogue between law enforcement and our community." As she outlined the goals and objectives of the advisory board, Naya could feel the support of her community behind her. This was their moment to shine a light on the issues they faced and to demand real change. But as she continued, she noticed Whitmore sitting in the back, arms crossed and a scowl on his face. His presence was a reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. After Naya finished her presentation, the panel began to ask questions. "What do you hope to achieve with this advisory board?" one official asked. Naya took a deep breath, knowing that this was her chance to drive home their message. "We hope to create a platform for open dialogue, to ensure that the voices of our community are heard and respected. We want to build trust, not fear." As the questions continued, Naya felt a surge of hope. They were making progress, and she could sense that the community was rallying behind her. But as the meeting came to a close, Whitmore stood up, his voice filled with disdain. "This is a waste of time. You think this advisory board will solve anything. It's nothing but a way for you to grandstand and create chaos." Naya stepped forward, her heart racing. "No, Sergeant. This is about accountability. We are standing up for our rights, and we will not be intimidated." The tension in the room was palpable as the community members rallied behind her, their voices rising in support. Naya felt the strength of their unity, a powerful reminder of why they were fighting. As the meeting adjourned, Naya knew that they had made progress. The advisory board proposal had been well received, and there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. They were not just advocating for change. They were creating a movement that would shape the future of Arden Falls. But as Naya left the meeting, she couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was far from over. Whitmore's presence loomed large, a constant reminder of the challenges they faced. In the days that followed, Naya and the coalition continued to push for the advisory board, working to solidify support and engage community members. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and they began to draft a formal proposal that outlined their goals and objectives. But as they worked to create real change, the pressure from Whitmore and his allies continued to mount. He was determined to quash their efforts, and Naya knew that they needed to remain vigilant. The day of the advisory board vote arrived, and Nia felt a mix of excitement and anxiety as she prepared to present their proposal to the city council. This was their chance to advocate for accountability and transparency, to ensure that their voices would be heard. As she entered the council chamber, Nia felt the weight of the moment settle over her. She was not just representing herself. She was representing every person in Arden Falls who had faced injustice. The room was filled with supporters from the community, their faces reflecting a mix of determination and hope. Nia took a deep breath, reminding herself of the strength that lay within their unity. As she stood before the council, Nia presented their proposal with passion and conviction. This advisory board is not just about dialogue. It's about creating a framework for accountability. We want to build a relationship between law enforcement and our community that is rooted in trust and respect. The council members listened intently, and Nia could feel the energy in the room shifting. She emphasized the importance of transparency and the need for open communication between the police and the community. But just as it seemed that they might gain traction, Whitmore stood up, his voice dripping with contempt. "You really think this board will solve anything? It's just a way for you to undermine law enforcement and create chaos." Nia took a deep breath, refusing to let Whitmore's words derail her. This isn't about undermining law enforcement. It's about ensuring accountability and respect for every member of our community. We can't afford to turn a blind eye to the issues we face. As the debate continued, Nia felt a surge of hope. The council was beginning to engage with the proposal, and community members rallied behind her, voicing their support. Finally, after a long and heated discussion, the council voted on the proposal. Nia held her breath, anxiety gripping her as the results were announced. The proposal for the advisory board passes. Cheers erupted from the crowd, and Nia felt tears of joy welling in her eyes. They had done it. This was a monumental step toward accountability and justice in Arden Falls. As she stood in the midst of her supporters, Nia felt a deep sense of pride. They had faced intimidation and challenges, but they had emerged victorious. The advisory board would provide a platform for dialogue, ensuring that the voices of the community were heard and respected. But as the celebration began, Nia knew that the fight was far from over. Whitmore would not back down easily, and there would be challenges ahead. In the days that followed, Nia and the coalition worked to establish the advisory board, engaging community members and law enforcement in the process. They emphasized the importance of collaboration, aiming to create a relationship built on trust and transparency. As the advisory board meetings began, Nia felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were not just advocating for change. They were creating a movement that would shape the future of Arden Falls. But as the meetings progressed, Whitmore's influence began to rear its head again. He continued to sow discord within the police department, rallying officers against the advisory board and attempting to undermine their efforts. Nia felt the pressure mounting, but she refused to let it deter her. They had come too far to turn back now. She stood firm in her belief that accountability and justice were within reach, and she would fight for it. As the advisory board began to take shape, Nia felt a sense of hope wash over her. They were building a community where every voice mattered, and she was determined to see it through to the end.